Hello, Sini. Nice to see you. Could you introduce yourself?
Hello, Henna. Nice to be here. So my name is Sini Forssell. I work for the students' mental health organization, Nyyti, specifically in a project on developing more compassionate cultures in higher education. And really what brought me to this work was a kind of interest in greater well-being for all us human beings as we go through life, and also an interest in developing better cultures of being together. So compassion and self-compassion have been two concepts I've been working with in this project, and really they are intertwined concepts, even if we may be talking more about self-compassion today. And yeah, I might also add that in particular my work has been about developing ways for students to together explore compassion and self-compassion in peer groups, rather than this being about individuals working on these things alone, which is I don't like this kind of hyper individualistic culture. So this is kind of working against that.
Okay, thank you. So what does self-compassion mean?
So if we think about compassion in general, this is compassion is about responding to suffering. So any difficult moments in our lives. So it's about noticing suffering first of all, then being moved to alleviate that suffering, and crucially, there's acting on this motive. So actually doing something to alleviate suffering. So if we think about compassion for ourselves, it's about being present, being there for yourself, being understanding, kind toward yourself in difficult moments, and helping yourself in these moments. And Dr. Kristin Neff, who's a pioneer in self-compassion research, has conceptualized self-compassion as kind of comprising of three elements. The first one is mindfulness. So we are present to the situation, to our feelings. We don't ignore or try to suppress our feelings, nor do we kind of exaggerate or over-identify with them. So for example, if we have failed something, we've had a presentation or an exam that we feel we have failed spectacularly at, we don't think, okay, I failed, therefore I am a failure, or I will never succeed. But instead we can kind of observe ourselves in that and the situation, like, okay, this is a really difficult moment for me. What kind of looking at what is happening here. And then another element is kindness toward ourselves. So rather than being angry at ourselves or beating ourselves up, we are gentle, we are understanding, we are just as we would be toward a good friend in that situation. And then the third element is what Neff calls common humanity. So also recognizing that I am not alone in this. It's part of our common humanity, the human experience, to have these difficult moments, these moments of suffering, and everyone has them. Everybody has bad moments. Everyone fails sometimes. So we are not alone in this, no matter how it feels. And well, also what I always like to talk about when talking about self-compassion is, besides what it is, also kind of it's worth exploring a little bit about what it isn't, because it's such, the word self-compassion just tends to elicit some reactions. We tend to kind of protest against the notion of self-compassion. It's kind of like, what, be kind to ourselves? Where would that lead. So there are these kind of, I suppose, like myths of self-compassion, these misconceptions of self-compassion. And probably maybe like the most typical one that people might have is that self-compassion somehow means or leads to laziness or giving up, thinking it's like, oh, I don't need to do that. I can just kind of let everything go. It's actually quite the contrary. If you imagine yourself talking to a good friend who is struggling with something that's important to them, you would not tell them to just give up. Oh yeah, that's too difficult for you, don't bother. But you would encourage them. You would kind of try encourage them to keep trying. And a self-compassionate person recognizes that achieving important goals will require effort. And also there is evidence in research actually that self-compassionate people set just as high goals for themselves as others do. Also, self-compassionate people can handle setbacks better without getting discouraged. So it's kind of, it even increases the ability to kind of take responsibility for things, because we can more easily face any mistakes and learn from them. And then well, I suppose two other ones. Another is that self-compassion is being weak or somehow soft, when in fact, when we think about what self-compassion is, what it comprises, this very act of facing difficult moments and feelings mindfully and addressing them constructively is actually quite brave, not weak. And also, I suppose some people associate self-compassion with being somehow selfish, like self indulgent, or when actually self-compassion gives us better resources also to care for others' well-being, care about other people, and also it kind of feeds this mindset that everybody deserves compassion. When we are compassionate towards ourselves, we can more easily kind of feel that others deserve compassion as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, how would you say that self-compassion affects well-being?
Yeah, this is an area where there's been quite a lot of research and very kind of promising results. It's self-compassion has been linked to lower levels of anxiety, less depression, less self-critical attitude, also greater life satisfaction, and also just from a more like physical health perspective, making better choices for our health, because we care about ourselves.
What benefits can self-compassion exercises give to studies?
So I'm a bit wary of framing self-compassion in this kind of instrumental way, that's, practice self-compassion and you will succeed better. But how I see, and it has been studied this also, and how I see self-compassion, kind of what I think is interesting in relation to studies, is that self-compassion supports approaching studies in a meaningful way. It supports the things that actually matter, like the things that make studying so worthwhile and also quite awesome, regardless of what results we may achieve. So, for example, in a study by Kristin Neff and colleagues, self-compassion was linked to this kind of learning or mastery or orientation rather than a results orientation. So being able to see studies as a process of learning more about something. importantly, self-compassion reduces the fear of failure. That just makes things much more enjoyable when you don't have to be afraid, but you can simply try things, you can explore things, learn things. And it's also linked to perseverance and lesser like avoidance of study tasks, which because of the lesser fear of failure, for example. So it's easier to try and try again when you're not beating yourself up in the event of failure, but instead supporting and encouraging yourself. And also self-compassion is linked to greater, again, this kind of safety thing, and so linked to greater creativity as well when there is less fear of failure, and also linked to kind of inspiration and enthusiasm and such positive feelings. Self-compassion also has as I kind of touched on earlier, it has benefits for our relationships to each other, which is also very important in the context of studying. So it has positive impacts on how we relate to each other. It increases our capacity for compassion toward others and kind of sustains that capacity. And it also, self-compassion boosts a sense of belonging. I'm actually, this is something I think it's quite important. As I mentioned before, I don't like this sort of individualistic approach, or at least like looking only at individuals. But also, I think, you know, we can ask ourselves, like, what kind of culture are we creating, and are we talking about things such as imperfection, or our kind of insecurities, our difficult moments? Are we talking about these things with each other, or is everybody kind of trying to maintain this facade that everything is going just fine? And also I think kind of how we kind of mirror each other in terms of relating to ourselves. I often am struck by, for example, if I'm surrounded by very self-critical people, that also affects trigger some kind of greater self-criticism in myself. I can actually kind of, it really is a bit contagious. I'm like, okay, hang on, if this completely brilliant person thinks they are bad at this, then, you know, kind of what does that make me? So it's also, yeah, it's important to think about how we are together, what kind of culture we are creating.
Yeah, thank you. Very good points there. And then last question, how can you learn self-compassion as a student? Do you have any concrete suggestions or examples?
I do, and we can develop and practice self-compassion. We know a lot these days about the plasticity of the human brain, and that we can actually develop our thinking and our responses through practice. So it's not a situation of, well, you know, I'm not a self-compassionate person, so there's nothing I can do, but rather we can actually develop self-compassion through well, a variety of exercises, really, which draw on the different facets of self-compassion I mentioned earlier. And these practices can be more kind of formal, something you do in perhaps a kind of planned way. You intentionally do them regularly. They can be guided meditations. There are plenty of guided meditations for guided practices for self-compassion. they can be writing exercises. For instance, we can write a compassionate letter to ourselves, or we can kind of identify, write down self-critical thoughts, and then think of, what is the more compassionate, what is a kind response to this. So many practices that we can do, but in terms of actually practicing, and I've noticed personally, and I kind of suspect this might resonate with many others too, that I've found it difficult to remember to do these and really stick to some kind of regular, more formal practice. But what I have learned is, at least in the moments where I notice I'm kind of struggling, to then stop for a moment and kind of observe the situation and intentionally think about giving myself kindness in that moment. So it's kind of like creating this habit for those moments as they arise. And there's actually an exercise called the self-compassion break, which is great for this. And that exercise, I believe, and also many others, really great resource in English for practices is Kristin Neff's website. It's selfcompassion.org, if I remember correctly, where there are many kind of instructions for various practices, and also quite a few guided practices as audio, so you can listen to them. And yeah, what else about practicing? Also, I think it's just important to also be mindful that this can be kind of a very new kind of radical thing, this self-compassion business. So it might feel like, well, I'll never get there, and this feels so difficult, and so just to also be patient, be self-compassionate about practicing self-compassion. So Kristin Neff writes that we have to allow ourselves to be slow learners when it comes to self compassion.
Thank you very much, Sini, for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.